Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Thank you very much for accommodating me. I know I was late to get onto the agenda, so I do appreciate the accommodation. I'm Dan McGrath, President of Minnesota Majority. I'm here to testify against House File 334, which I'm sure is a shock to most of you. Besides being extraordinarily dangerous for election integrity, this bill is unconstitutional. Article 7, Section 7 of the Minnesota Constitution states, the official year for the state of Minnesota commences on the first Monday in January in each year, and all terms of office terminate at that time. The general election shall be held on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November in each even-numbered year. We simply cannot conduct general election voting prior to or after the constitutionally designated election day. The Constitution wasn't designed for elections to be held for weeks on end. They take place on one day. I raised this issue in the State Elections Committee, and Senate research staff looked into it and produced a memo about this issue. They found only one state had had early voting challenged based upon the state's constitution. That was Maryland. The Maryland Supreme Court struck down early voting as unconstitutional for violating the state's constitution. Their constitution has a similar statement about when election day will be held as Minnesota's. Even if the bill were constitutional, which I would say it certainly is not, the proposal is a threat to the integrity of our already weak and vulnerable election system. This bill doesn't just permit early voting by registered people. It allows the use of election day registration and vouching for 15 days prior to election day. There will be no citizen election judges that we currently employ for election day registration, so we'll be putting our faith entirely in our government with no citizen oversight for the counting of ballots and accepting of ballots. There will be no opportunity for partisan poll challengers, no realistic opportunity for partisan poll challengers to be present for 15 days on end for early voting to take place. It's hard enough for the political parties to get people to monitor elections for one day. 15 would be a daunting and impossible task. So we would be throwing away all of the mechanisms of citizen oversight, including election day registration and vouching for up to 15 people. One person can vouch for up to 15 people for 15 days on end. We know that vouching has been abused in the state of Minnesota. In the 2010 election, students with an organization called Organizing for America were caught systematically vouching for people they did not know at a university precinct in Minneapolis. One of the volunteers said, well, I didn't know this was wrong to do. I was just doing what the organizers, her higher-ups, told her to do. It was an organized, systematic conspiracy to commit vouching fraud. In the 2004 election, an organization named America Coming Together published and publicized a vouching fraud scheme exactly like what Organizing for America was doing. We have had eyewitness reports from election judges and poll challengers all over the state who have observed this process observed this crime of vouching fraud in process. We'll be opening the doors to multiply the possibility of vouching fraud by a factor of 15 with this bill. This is an insane combination of systems. There are several states that have early voting. There are only 2 that have election day registration and vouching. 2. Mixing election day registration and vouching with early voting, it's got to be the worst idea that I've ever heard for Minnesota's election system. Beth Frazier testified that the statewide voter registration will be updated when people use early voting that will prevent them from voting more than once. But Ms. Frazier is presuming that the people who are going in to vote are providing their own name, when if they were going to attempt to vote more than once, they can provide any name they want, any name and address they want with the vouching system. Since we're not checking ID, we're not verifying voters' identity or eligibility, and the votes cannot be retrieved once they go into the ballot box with early voting. Once it's in the system, even if you find out later no such person, no such address, that vote can't be retrieved, it's already been counted. So we can't have every single convenience for making voting easier, and at the same time have none of the features that other states employ to make cheating harder. unless the objective, of course, is to be governed by the candidates or the party that cheats the best. That sounds like, if that's progress, that's progressing towards a banana republic. All this bill accomplishes is to make the window for fraud exponentially wider, while casting aside the meager protections we already have in place with citizen oversight. I don't believe there's any way to make this bill workable. I'd urge the members of the committee to vote against this serious threat to fair and reliable elections.